Welcome to This Week in Missouri Politics. We're here on the eve of opening day here in St. Louis, but we're joined as right as the campaign goes on the eve of its opening stretch with Jay Ashcroft, running for Secretary of State. Very glad to have you on. We're broadcasting from St. Louis today, right in the middle of probably the biggest election debacle we've seen in a long time, and you've been very outspoken. Tell me what your reaction was. Well,
first of all, thanks for having me on, and I'm very excited that the home opener is coming up. Baseball is back in St. Louis, and it's about time. You know, it's hard to put into words. You know, when it comes right down to it, for an election, you really just have to have three things. You have to have something to write your vote on, something to write your vote with, and a big container to hold them. I mean, it's that simple.
Yeah.
And we failed to make sure that we had ballots for people. We have a chief election authority in this state, the Secretary of State, and it's his job to make sure that the local election authorities are prepared, have the resources and the training, and to work with them to make sure that this sort of debacle doesn't happen. We had people that were actually disenfranchised. They went to the polls, they were told that they could not vote because there were no ballots, and they were told to come back later. That's reprehensible.
Problems in the 2014 Democratic primary.
We've had problems in 2014. There were places during the presidential preference primary that ran out of ballots. I believe that there was another election authority actually on Tuesday outside of the St. Louis area that ran out of ballots, but I think that was around 4 or 5 o'clock. You know, it's a little bit more understandable when you have a lot more people voting, and that's a wonderful thing. But we had places here in St. Louis County where they might have had 5 ballots to start today, or not even any. You know, we need a Secretary of State that takes the job of being the chief election authority seriously. And I wanted to check on this. I looked at the Secretary of State's bio that he has on his website, and he listed for his 3 priorities. You know what the #1 priority was? Making sure that eligible voters had ballot access.
So it's a funny game sometimes with statewide elected officials. You're the chief election authority when it works, and sometimes you're like, well, there's a local board when it doesn't. If you're the Secretary of State, will you remedy this problem? And if this happens again on your watch, will you own it?
Yes. I mean, a couple of things there. One, the duties of the office are to be the chief election authority. It's not a remedial thing. Once the problem happens, people have been disenfranchised. You can't correct it. It's not like the state auditor that can say, oh, Executive Department A has to pay another $25 to Executive Department B. It's happened. People have been disenfranchised. They were not allowed to vote. How'd you like to be a first-time voter that went to vote and you say, what? In America, we don't have ballots? You know, I think that shows the fact that we need individuals that are qualified, that have worked elections, understand how to do that. You know, Jason Kander has a good resume. You know, he fought for our country, and if you read what he did, I think he did an excellent job there. He served in the legislature, but either he wasn't prepared to be Secretary of State by that, or he was more concerned with his own election than he was with the ability of we the people to be a part of the election on Tuesday.
Well, you made a call for an investigation. The Speaker of the House, Todd Richardson, formed a committee to look into what's happened. What can they do differently?
Well, I think the first thing we need to do is we need to see what happened. There are a couple of broad things we can say. We need to have better communication between the Secretary of State's office and local election authorities.
Let me ask you a question about that. In Butler County, Tanya Devendal, outstanding county clerk. If there's a problem, it's her fault. Now, she doesn't have these problems. But in St. Louis County, it's a commission and a whatever. Does St. Louis County need a county clerk like Tanya Devendal in Butler County where you can say, if you screw this up, it's your fault?
Well, I think every voter in Missouri would be well served if she were their chief election authority. Please, I understand that. And really, that's what the local election authorities, the county clerks and the boards of elections, they strive to do. I've campaigned in all 114 counties of the state. I've talked to countless local election authorities, and they are all doing their best to do a good job, but they need to be supported by the Secretary of State. The Secretary of State knows the law. He's the answer man should be for those secretaries, for those local election authorities. It's so bad, the communication between those election authorities and the secretaries of state, that they've set up a Facebook page so that when a local clerk has a question, they don't even bother asking the Secretary of State because the office refuses to tell them what the law requires in writing and won't back up their answers. So they have a Facebook page that, by the way, they've not allowed Jason Kander to be part of, where they discuss the best way to run elections. I mean, that's a problem right there. And I forgot to answer a question you asked earlier, and I don't want to avoid it. Yes, if as Secretary of State, this won't happen, but if it did, I'd take responsibility. When you run for an office, when you take that oath to fulfill the duties of that office and to serve the people, not be a politician, but a public servant, it's your duty, it's your responsibility to do that, and people are sick and tired of excuses.
So voter ID, longtime Republican priority, makes sense to a lot of Missourians. I think a lot of people are surprised you don't have to show your ID to vote. Will that pass this year?
It should. It should have passed in any of the last 10 years and made its way to the ballot for the people to vote on it. Once again, it's being held up in the Senate. And we need individuals in public office to take responsibility to fulfill the duties of their office. Photo ID is a common sense way to protect your vote and to make sure that you're not disenfranchised by fraud or, well, it wouldn't have taken care of the ineptitude of the Secretary of State's office in this case, but to help make sure that you're not disenfranchised, both by in-person voting fraud and absentee ballots. Representative,
the politics of it. You'll have campaign seems to be going well, but if voter ID passes, your opponent, Senator Krause, will be the person in the Senate where it's hung up. That'll have a great week. Are you cheering him on?
Look, if we do what's right for the people of the state, that's what we should do. My father, when he was governor, had a plaque on his desk, and I think we've forgotten this, but it said, when you don't care who gets the credit, there's no end to the good you can do. That's paraphrasing. And that's what we need to get back to. We have so many politicians that are worried about who gets credit, and they're not worried about doing the right thing. When I filed that initiative petition, I asked the senator to be on the committee with me. I said, we'll make it a committee. I asked every statewide Republican that was running to be on that committee. I said, we'll all be equal. We'll do it together because it's the right thing. 3 other people agreed to be on it because they were so worried about their getting publicity or their getting the credit. When we do the right thing, there's plenty of credit to go around.
So about your campaign, seems like that you've done, the grassroots stuff seems to be coming along well. The fundraising, something that people were raising questions about. Yeah. Last time you were on, I think we talked about it. Looks like you're turning the tide on that.
We spent probably the first 8 or 9 months of the campaign working on the grassroots side, getting out, introducing myself to people. Campaigned in all 114 counties of the state last year between March and December, which, amazingly enough, I don't know that any other candidate can say they've done that. On the fundraising side, we're going to report, $380,000, I think, for the quarter, which we're happy about. Obviously, our goal is always to do better, and we will continue to add to that next quarter. But I'm thrilled by how it's going. I'm humbled by the kindness of the people that I run into and their excitement about getting real change in state government.
On the ballot, you'll be on the August ballot, whether, I don't know if it's August or November, but SGR 39 could be on there.
Right.
Some call it religious freedom, some call it discrimination. Where do you stand on it?
I think it's a matter of personal freedom to think what you want to think.
Sure.
You know, we have disagreements, and we disagree politely. SJR just says that if it is a deeply held religious belief of yours that something is not correct, you shouldn't be required to take part in it. That's all it is. It protects everyone. It doesn't say that if you have a lunch counter and someone that you don't like comes in, you can say, oh, you can't eat that sandwich that's sitting there. No, it doesn't say that at all.
Are you surprised by the business community's opposition to this?
You know, I think a lot of people are misinformed about the bill. It's like photo ID. You know, you have one side that's talking about people being disenfranchised, and yet they can't point to a single person that would be disenfranchised, and no one would by the photo ID bill. I've read that. Representative Alferman has worked on it. It doesn't disenfranchise anyone.
It looks to me like Senator Onder, if people got to know him, would realize, well, there's a difference of opinion. He's certainly not a bigot. He's certainly not a bad person. He disagrees about this issue.
Yeah, he has a wonderful heart. He is a good individual, and the things that are being attributed to him, it just shows the degradation and the corruption of politics.
So on politics, big governor's race. You picked a side yet?
Yeah, I'm supporting a Republican nominee. Same place I was last time we talked.
Presidential race, though. Give me your reaction to the Trump phenomenon. He won Missouri, stumbled in Wisconsin. Every time you think that these kind of outlandish statements are going to end him, it doesn't. You're talking to voters in Missouri. Obviously, you're talking to a lot of Trump supporters by the looks of the preference primary.
Yeah, The craziest thing about this race is when I go to talk to someone, even people that I know well, I generally don't know for sure if they were a Trump supporter or a Cruz supporter or a Kasich supporter before I talk to them. People are so fed up with politicians instead of public servants and excuses and people that don't do what they said they'd do. This is the most exciting presidential race that I can remember, and I've kind of followed them all my life. So I think it's great. It's we, the people, making our voices known, and that's the point of elections, so that we decide. So I love that aspect of it.
Sometimes you wonder how different the country would be if your father would have ran in 2000. A lot of talk about that.
If you talk about that, my mother will not like you. She's very happy to have him back in Willard, Missouri. So no.
Well, hopefully she wasn't watching that, but she'll be watching as the cycle comes on. We hope you'll be back on This Week in Missouri Politics. Thanks for
having me. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you very much.
We'll be right back with our Opinion Maker panel, but first we're going to leave you with this week's leading Missouri economic indicators.
All across Missouri, our new car and truck dealers are building strong local economies. When you buy a car or truck in Missouri, you're helping to support over 20,000 Missouri families who rely on the auto industry for good-paying local jobs. You're also helping fund our communities, schools, first responders, and our roads, because dealers generate millions of dollars in tax revenue. Missouri's automobile dealers have been the foundation of our communities for generations and for generations to come. The Missouri Automobile Dealers Association, the heart of Missouri.
For more than a century, the St. Louis Carpenters Union has shaped our communities. Through trusted alliances, we deliver skilled professional craftspeople, while our business partners provide the kind of quality jobs that keep our economy humming. It's a blueprint that has worked since 1882. Turning Missouri into a right-to-work state stalls progress, wipes out jobs, and kills momentum. Right to work is wrong for everyone. Let's keep Missouri moving forward. Visit carpdc.org to learn more.
Welcome back to This Week in Missouri Politics, joined by our Opinion Maker panel. First time on the show, Earl Scissors, Gateway Government Relations. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
Donna Baringer, older woman, plus running for state rep this year. Going to head to Jeff City, right?
That's my goal.
Good to have you back in.
Thank you for having me.
Friend of the show, on for, 10th time, 5th time, David Barklage. Don't even need it. I guess some people can just leave it there, like share. You don't have to explain what share does.
I normally come out ahead if you just sort of leave it at that. So.
Yeah, let's go David Barklage. And Councilman Mark Harder here in St. Louis County, very glad to have you on. Give us the rundown on the county election debacle, and what do you think they need to do?
Well, as you know, the Election Commission ran out of ballots. They also mixed up ballots, wrong ballots at wrong polling places. And I started getting calls on Tuesday morning from candidates and constituents saying, I can't vote. And this is like 8 o'clock in the morning. So it's kind of rolled from there, and it turned out we had about 60 plus precincts with a problem of some kind. And so we're dealing with that this week, and I've called for a committee of the whole in St. Louis County to hear the story from the Election Commission and find out what the problem is, who's responsible, and how do we fix this going forward.
You know, I'm just a simple hillbilly from West Butler County, but back home, we just have a county clerk. Why don't you just elect you a county clerk, and if they do a bad job, kick them out of office?
And many counties have that. St. Louis County is a little bit unique. We have 800,000 people, voters in the area, and we have election board that is appointed by the governor. And the funny thing in this whole thing, we've not heard from that election board. And there's 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats on that board, and they have been silent on this whole issue.
I knew somehow it would be Jay Nixon's problem, because most things in the state are. But I want to say one thing. We had the same problem when Rick Stream ran, that they ran out of ballots both in North County and in West County, and that was very frustrating, and it's very unfair for candidates. And you know, you hate to see that for a candidate, that kind of stress and that kind of, and you don't know what it's going to really impact. The one thing I do hope that the county does look at is that there is a consistent problem in North County of precincts being kept open for whatever reason, coming in late, and some suspect voting. So I think that if they do a review, I hope they look at everything, and I don't mean that in terms of a slap towards my Democrat colleagues. I just mean is that I think there are some long-term problems in St. Louis County voting that need to be addressed, and we'd hope they'd address them at once and find out what the truth is.
Earl Scissors, if you're a Republican, you refresh the Secretary of State's page on election night, and every St. Charles County, all these counties come in, and there's always precincts in certain parts of St. Louis that come in at the very end. How many races have the Republicans been up by a few votes, and then why are there these problems, and why can't they learn from the other parts of the state and just do it like they do it?
It makes us crazy, those of us who are watching the election results on a live stream basis. And it just goes to show how complicated it is to run an actual election. And it's frustrating. They do it all over the country. I believe it's a reflection of the municipality system in St. Louis and the surrounding areas. There are so many municipalities. There are so many different ballots, so many different candidates on different ballots at the same polling places. It's a ridiculous, confusing system that, yes, they have, the election board has one job to get it right, and it's frustrating that they can't seem to do it, but I think it's a reflection on what we're doing here in St. Louis with our municipalities.
Donna Baringer, St. Charles County has the same issues. They seem to be able to count their ballots in a relatively timely manner. Maybe somebody should ask Mr. Christopher to come over for a little help.
I like to go back to my son. You know, he's almost 21, and they're laughing that it's paper. They want to know why we have not gone towards technology. And so I think that's where we should focus, is how do we go forward in the future, because I just don't think that paper is the future.
I think you have a constituent and a neighbor who would agree with that, Scott Linedecker.
So, absolutely.
Sort of the author and one of the early movers to use iPads and other kinds of devices at polling to expedite it.
So at the end of the day, what comes of this? Do you get a county clerk? Do you try to find out how other counties do this successfully?
Well, I hope that, I believe the Secretary of State is going to do their own investigation, and Representative Dogan was appointed this week by the Speaker to conduct an investigation from the House side. So hopefully out of all these different meetings, we should find hopefully some consensus on a solution. And maybe that is a more an electable person that goes into the county election commission and is responsible for them, and we elect that person to be ahead of that. Right now everyone's appointed, and unfortunately the nothing coming out of that is deafening. We need to get a handle on that.
David Barklage is just entering the Senate race. I mean, usually these statewide office holders are the top election official when it helps them, and then when something like they have very little control over this happens, they tell you they're not. Is this a Senate issue race?
I think so.
Yeah. Earl Scissors, does this become an issue in the Senate race? I mean, I've heard him say he's the top election authority. The elections were really screwed up in the largest county in the state.
I think that there will be other issues that take precedent over this one. I think the two Senate candidates are going to go after each other on a number of issues, whether it's veterans issues, whether it's Medicaid expansion. I think there's going to be a number of issues that they focus on, and they're going to get it right the next time, you would think.
Do you think they solve this problem?
I think they solve it if they get a chance to look at the entire process. and where the failures happened.
I'll make my prediction. I think election night, there'll be Republicans that are ahead statewide, and you're fresh, and the first congressional district will come back late, and it'll be weird, and probably nothing changes. Speaking of status quo, the e-tax was on the ballot.
Yes.
They seem to have been able to count those ballots relatively right. Kansas City and St. Louis both overwhelmingly renewed their e-tax, although there was some progress made by the no side. Jeff City's talking about ending the whole thing. You're going to Jeff City. What's going to be your message?
Well, my message is the 16th Ward in the city of St. Louis has the highest voter turnout. It is the most diverse in the way of Republican and Democrat, and we overwhelmingly said yes on putting this tax on ourselves. And that should send a very clear message, is that we want this tax, we want it to continue, and both sides agree to it. I think what you, two things you need to know about the e-tax is, number one, they focused very heavily in my ward. My voters had an average of 2 phone calls, 2 door knocks. There were signs. I mean, the literature, I mean, the people that came out ahead were the publishers. So
Nothing wrong with that, right?
and then the other part is that in my ward, you know, if you do away with the tax, where do you make it up? And if you're going to go after the real estate tax, someone like myself and my ward is going to get hit and hit hard. And we can't afford that. It's just not, it's irresponsible, because it would hurt those areas like mine that are the strongest.
Yeah, but I say one thing, is we are starting to see where cities, and I was on the city council in Cape Girardeau, and you were mayor of Poplar Bluff, and you know, we were always able to sell sales taxes on the idea that people from outside of the city are paying for it. I think we're getting to almost an egregious point where we're pushing taxation without representation. I mean, it's not just that we're taxing people that don't have the right to vote on it. I mean, you're obviously, people in your ward pay taxes, and you know, it's in a more of a higher income ward in the city. But we are putting higher and higher assessments on people who do business in these communities that I don't think are necessarily reflective of the services they get. And those people have no control over wasteful spending or anything else. We saw this in Forestill. They just passed a gas tax specifically on 2 truck stops and a gas station. And basically the sell point was, we're going to tax them because no one has to pay that. And it put those at a competitive disadvantage. And so I think we're going to see more and more as pressure mounts on cities to find revenue sources that don't impact cities. The whole ticketing scam was ticketing everybody but our own residents. And I just think that that is a very much an affront. And I think that you're going to see the legislature have to get involved, which I don't think the legislature wants to get involved in local government. But when you have cities constantly trying to tax everybody but themselves and take no steps to manage the waste or their own priorities, it's a problem.
Yeah.
But people demand services. The school district that I live in, the Ladue School District, we have the same high school. Pretty much the bones of the high school has been the same high school that I went to over 20 years ago. So they passed successfully a tax to really revamp the high school and put it on a level to compete with the MICDSs and the John Burroughs that are.
But all those people go to that school and they benefit from it, and I think that's I think it was a good tax. I think it was the right thing to do. But when you specifically target taxes that citizens don't have to pay, and you go out to try to find taxes that everybody else pays that has no right to vote on it and has no say over how it's managed, I think that's a problem.
Mark,
I think it's a bad
quick question
trend.
to tie this up. You represent probably the most prosperous part of the state in the county council.
Yes.
Do businesses not go to the city because of the e-tax?
I think there's a number of companies that have decided to relocate into the St. Louis County because of that.
Quick answer, David Barklage, are there businesses that don't go to the city because of their earnings tax?
I think absolutely. I think taxes are an issue.
Donna Baringer, do you believe there are businesses that don't come to the city because of the earnings tax?
No, I disagree. You may look at it once in a while and say, 1%, but when you look at what that 1% is, it's so small in the return. And if we were to change the tax, and the real estate tax, so let's be clear, it wouldn't just be on the residents, it'd also be on the businesses. So it'd be a disincentive to businesses to come in.
Well, do you believe that the earnings tax makes a decision when a company decides to relocate?
I do, but if you look at the numbers, over 70% in the main cities have voted to keep it. So the people living there are okay with it.
Governor's race. The filing's closed. The folks talked about one of the Republicans might leave the race. They all 4 stayed in. Koster has a legitimate primary opponent in former mayor of Kansas City and former state senator Charlie Wheeler. How do you see the race?
I think Attorney General Koster is going to prevail on the Democratic side, And I believe, David, your old friend Peter Kinder is going to be the nominee on the Republican side. Governor Kinder has been on ballots in Missouri for over 20 years. He has a base in Southeast Missouri. He has very good relations in this part of the state. I don't see that in any of the other candidates.
As filing closed, we saw a huge amount of fundraising for the Attorney General and for Eric Greitens. You notice you didn't mention him.
Nobody knows who he is in terms of voters.
But you know who
It's a
he
lot of
is
money.
because he's the first candidate for governor you had lunch with at the Democratic Convention in 2008 when you were praising and cheering Obama.
I shouldn't have opened my mouth, but I was honored to be with Governor Holden at the Democratic Convention in Denver in 2008, and he was bringing along a young whippersnapper with him that he was trying to guide, and that was one Eric Greitens, and I enjoyed a nice lunch with him.
Councilman Harder, how do you explain that to voters that you're very in touch with on the Republican side?
Well, I've looked at all four of the candidates. I wish we could roll them into one because they all have very strong and they always have weaknesses. So I think they all have their issues. The issues with Greitens has been kind of disturbing because he doesn't seem to have traction in Missouri. He seems to be running everywhere else but Missouri and getting his money from outside. Most of his money comes from outside the state. So that's been a contention within the party, and I'm very active in the party. And he's not getting a lot of traction within the party. Now, he seems to be strong with independents, but I don't think he's getting much traction in the party.
Donna Baringer, Charlie Wheeler's a legitimate candidate for governor, and Chris Koster might be the most conservative Democratic nominee in 50 years. I could see some folks in Kansas City voting for Charlie Wheeler. They've done it most of their lives. And then there might be some protest votes of some liberals that don't like an extremely conservative Democrat leading their state party.
Koster's our next governor. So that's why I'll be pushing very hard and be very clear where I stand. So I see him winning the Democratic side. And I agree, I think Kinder on the Republican side because of his name recognition on the ballot. So fish fries are my litmus test. So we just got through fish fry season. And so people come from all over the metropolitan area to the fish fries in my neighborhood. And so I talk to people and they're asking me and they want to know, we need to know who's a good governor to lead us in this next race. And I tell them it's Governor Koster.
So you predict Kinder in the Republican primary? You think in the Republican side?
I think so.
David Barklage, you're with the Bruner campaign. What do you think the race is right now?
You know, I think that you're starting to see breakouts, and we're starting to get into that season. I think you've got two candidates, Peter Kinder, Catherine Hanaway, that have done a very good job throughout their career, integrity, doing things for the right reason. I think John Bruner, when it comes down to voters and when people start to actually see advertising on the race, I think it's Bruner's to take. And I'll tell you, there's a couple reasons why. One is that Bruner can't be bought, and I think that is something that has moved the Trump campaign forward. Second, that people are looking for an outsider, and you have Bruner's an outsider, Greitens is really more of a Washington insider, and the last thing is they want experience, and Bruner has the right experience. And I think those three elements make Bruner the profile of who people want
I heard the
as
Bruner
governor.
case, though. You picked a favorite yet?
I have not. Like I said, I think they all have their strengths and weaknesses. I've met them all. I've dealt with them all.
To wrap everything up, I want to thank David Barklage. The Barklage Club just ended, and thank Dave Spence, raised a lot of money for the Epilepsy Foundation. Congratulations to Alex Eaton, came in with a big win. Thank everybody that voted and participated and helped out the Epilepsy Foundation. And we will leave you with that for This Week in Missouri Politics, and we'll see you next time. This Week in Missouri Politics, brought to you in part by Sterling Bank.